Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Christian Taylor-Wolski and I look after the space startup program at Stone & Chalk. Many of Stone & Chalk is Australia's largest startup support program with hubs in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. Stone & Chalk Space is based at Lot 14 in Adelaide, the land of the Kaurna people, and we acknowledge the elders, past and present, as we acknowledge all traditional owners of land in Australia. Stone & Chalk Group is Australia's home for emerging tech, serving 850 residents at startup hubs in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And we provide those startup entrepreneurs with knowledge, access to capital, infrastructure, and guidance. We drive emerging technology innovation for positive impact. We're proud to have over 250 signups for this event from all over Australia and overseas. I'd like to thank our partner, the Exploration Company, for this event about research and commercialization of space. I'd like to welcome our speakers from the Australian Space Agency, Main Sequence Ventures, and Swinburne University of Technology. Our first segment today, Uri will introduce us to the Exploration Company. Hélène is co-founder and CEO of the Exploration Company. She had a distinguished career at Airbus, including roles as Vice President of the Orion spacecraft, European Service Module, and as Head of Innovation at Airbus. As many of the Orion spacecraft is a reusable crewed spacecraft and part of NASA's Project Artemis and scheduled to launch on the SLS in a few weeks. So this is really exciting stuff. After Hélène's remarks, we will hear a keynote from Aude Vignel, Chief Technology Officer of the Australian Space Agency. This is followed by a discussion panel and Q&A. For that discussion panel, we'll be joined by Dr. Rebecca Allen, who is Head of Microgravity at Swinburne University of Technology, and Martin Dorsma, partner at Main Sequence Ventures, the venture capital fund initiated by the CSIRO. Just a bit of virtual housekeeping. This session is scheduled for 1 hour sharp. You can post your questions in the Q&A tab on the Zoom platform. We've also had questions already submitted to us beforehand in the sign-up process. We'll refer to them in the Q&A. And so without further ado, Hélène, a virtual welcome to you from Australia, handing over to you now.
Thank you very much, Christian. So let me share a little bit my screen. Great. Okay, so basically what I'd like to talk about is this question: will we live on Mars in 2030? And I chose this provocative question because I think we have the chance to live at a very special time. If we look back in the past, some of us had the chance to see the Saturn V bringing people to the moon for the first time in humanity's history. It was an amazing time, an amazing event. It was also, let's say, a way to bring people to moon, which was extremely costly. If we come back to how much it's costed, we speak about double-digit $billion. We speak about tons of propellant to send, at the end of the day, 2 people to lunar surface and bring back safely 3 people. And this whole vehicle that you can see here being basically not reused in just one shot. So of course, this was an amazing step for humanity, but this was not a sustainable way and an affordable way to explore space. And I think we have the chance now to live at a very special time where step by step, we are mastering the technical capability to explore space in a new way, in a way which is ways more affordable, which is also sustainable. And I'd like to give the example, you're coming back on the 16th century, where basically we as humans were able to explore the world because we were able basically to master the technology that would enable us to make basically big ships that would be solid enough to cross the oceans. And I think now we are on the edge of being able to make very big space vehicles, which are reusable, which can be refueled in orbit, and can be refueled at the end of the day with propellant made from space resources. And if you think about it, the vehicle can be reused, the vehicle can be refueled in orbit, and in a few years from now, it can be refueled with propellant made from space resources. That's a complete different way of traveling in space. That's an affordable way to travel in space. And this is the reason why we are at the beginning of a new dynamism of space exploration. We don't go there anymore just to put a flag or to go and to explore. We go there to stay. And that's the reason why we have a new dynamism of stations around the Earth, stations around the moon, and new ways to basically do space-to-space transportation. So I just would like to give you a few examples of this dynamism. So today, that's the situation around the Earth and around the Moon and around Mars, right? So we have two stations. One International Space Station here. I think many of you have, sadly, from my perspective, heard the news that Russia is going to get out of this cooperation with the US. But okay, so International Space Station for the time being and the Chinese space station. These are the two operational space stations which are orbiting the Earth right now. And it's basically a market which is driven by public money, especially because it's still very costly to go there. If you want to send 1 kilogram to International Space Station and then bring it back to Earth, as a minimum, it will cost you $100,000. And if you want to use 1 hour of an astronaut, it's going to cost you $150,000 for 1 hour. So way is more expensive than that lawyer. So then let's look in just by the end of the decade, right? So tomorrow, in 8 years from now. And that's the situation, how it may look like, without being too much optimistic. 2 stations around the moon, the Gateway with the Orion I had the privilege to work on in Europe, which is currently in the process of being built. Here, the 4 private space stations, perhaps there'll be not 4 because perhaps only 2 or 3, but currently we have 4 private space stations which have been awarded NASA contracts and which are co-funded by NASA and private investors. International Space Station's plan to retire. Well, nobody knows how to bring it down. That's a technical problem, but perhaps with SpaceX that solution may come. And then China space stations, and I didn't put a Russian flag here, but also this may become actually real in 2035, with also India having its own private space station project, and potentially 2035, 36, first base at lunar surface. So that's basically the dynamism we are living in. And I was presenting the example of Starship, which is going to be a very big container ship, enabling us to go to these new destinations. Actually, at the exploration company, and I want to say a very few words about what we're doing, we're producing a small vehicle which basically complements the very big Starship, which is a vehicle which serves all this ecosystem of stations with the same philosophy of being reusable. We can be refueled in orbit, and at the end of the day, we can be refueled with propellant made from space resources. So you can see here an image of the Earth vehicle, which is basically orbiting on the Earth, can also dock with stations. And that's the same architecture with an additional propulsion system, which we're using for the moon. So we built our vehicles like car, same architecture, can be reused, can be refueled. And we are using LOX methane, so the same propellant as SpaceX. And at the end of the day, we shall be able to refuel with propellant made from space resources. Something I wanted to share with you about what we're doing, because we are very excited about that. We'll be probably the first in the world to use green propellant for our capsule, so H2O2 for the one who are specialists, and we are using biomethane for our lunar engine. And to my knowledge, we'll be the first in the world to open source our operating system. And I think this is something which echoes very well the Australian ecosystem, because we believe that this space exploration race is not only the fact of a few space companies. We're going to live there. So we'll have automotive companies, we'll have drilling companies. And I know that you work very closely with mining companies in Australia. Schlumberger is, so the oil and gas company is one of our investors, because they are willing to explore and potentially to exploit the resources of the moon. And all of these various rovers, drillers, etc., will have to communicate to each other. So not only we want to make space exploration affordable by having a very affordable price, 25 to 30% of the competition, but also enabling others to communicate in a very easy manner with our vehicles. So that's the reason why we're going to open source basically operating system, being kind of the Android of space exploration, if I may say so. So just wanted to give you a few insights about the company. We are very young, we are 1 year old, but already we built our first re-entry demonstrator, you can see here, which is going to be ready for flight and qualify in October. And this is our 24 vehicle, which is on track. We're going to be launched with SpaceX in October 24. And we fly with clients, which are going to be placed here. These are basically the people we were going to fly. And the big need for us starting 27 is really to serve this new ecosystem of private space stations and then to go to the moon. So having said that, just wanted to give you an example of a private company which is embracing basically this new dynamism. I will finish with speaking a little bit about Australia. And one of the reasons for us to participating to this event is that we are very excited about the space ecosystem in Australia, which I think is one of the most dynamic in the world in terms of cooperations between space and non-space industry, leveraging really this knowledge of the mining industry that you have here. And this is very much aligned, I would say, with our philosophy of how space exploration is going to evolve, being a place not only for space company, but also for many non-space companies. So with that being said, and I hope I had, let's say, I could give you an insight of perhaps how space could be in the coming years. So probably we'll not live on Mars in 2030. We'll simply live at lunar surface, but that's really going to be a huge step for humanity. But I think honestly that in 2035, 2040, we will start really living on Mars in a sustainable manner, Moon being basically a sandbox to de-risk technologies that afterwards will help us live in Mars in the next decade, this decade really being focused on the Moon as the first step. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to hand over to Aude, which I have the honor to introduce. So Aude, you are the CTO of the Australian Space Agency, you're an aerospace engineer, and you've led before many big aerospace programs with a focus on satellite and communications. So Aude, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring presentation. It was scary to hear you saying that 2030 is in 8 years' time. That's a very short time. So it's around the corner indeed. And thank you for the comments about the space ecosystem. And I hope that the roles we are fulfilling, especially in the CTO team, the Australian Space Agency, is there to promote and leverage this capability and the dynamism and vibrant ecosystem we have in the space community here. I'd like to say, so talking about how we try to promote commercial and research activity in space, the KPI and the goal of the agency are very clear. We're here to grow the space industry and we're here to create jobs. So as soon as we have funding to do programs and projects in Australia, I really try to push this funding in the industry as soon as I can. So I really try not to have this money lying on our table for too long. So we're really a pipeline to direct this funding and leverage the capability we have here. So that's every day, that's really something that helps us prioritize our activities. By doing this, am I going to help create jobs? Am I going to help growing the industry? And that's, I think, very healthy to have a clear goal on a day-to-day basis. So the way we do this, and I'm sure most of first of all, we've done a strategy that is very clear and very simple, and we've highlighted 7 areas of priorities where we think we have something to bring to the table for different reasons. Either it's because we already have some expertise and capability in the area, or because we have a competitive advantage, or because our location is specific. For example, we're looking at the southern sky. So when you're thinking of doing some space situational awareness activities, it's good to bring that southern sky view so we can have a good catalog of space debris and space objects. And so these 7 areas, I think you all know them as much as I do: communication, obviously, Earth observation, positioning, navigation, and timing. We have a leapfrog R&D, which we talk a bit more, SSA, and access to space. And last but not least, and you mentioned that, Helen, is the remote operation and robotics. And you are right to say that with our 40 years of expertise in mining, I tell this story and I will tell it again. I didn't know much about the mining industry in Australia, despite being here for 22 years now. But the first time I visited the mission control of Rio Tinto in Perth, when I opened the door and I entered that room, I thought that I took the wrong door because it looked like a mission control for space activities. It was very professional, a lot of control station, different pods doing different activities. And I approached the pods of the people who are doing the drilling, and I was watching what they were doing. They're using comms over geostationary satellites, so there is a bit of delay. And they have user interface which cater that delay. And I could see these people operating activities that were happening 2,000 kilometers away in a harsh environment. And I was looking at what they were doing. I was asking questions to the lady who was operating her tool, and she was telling me, I'm drilling 2,000 kilometers away. I could be drilling on the moon and on Mars. It would make no difference. And this is where you think, we have something here we can export in space really easily. And one of our programs, the Trailblazer program, is exactly about that, is to demonstrate our ability to do remote operation on the moon. And when we talk about what we could bring to the Artemis project, we've signed the Artemis Accord and we're participating in all the workshops that NASA has been conducted not later than last week in Farnborough. We are very clear in what we want to bring there. So that's, in a way, that's easy to have little or a finite number of activities because we know where we want to play and we can focus our effort in where we know we can make a difference. So one of the way we can stimulate these research activities and these commercial activities is to do program like the Trailblazer program to demonstrate to the world we have capability there, and then they can become commercial and they can deploy their services and offer their services to whoever need them. But I think the role of the agency in Australia is really to kickstart this niche capability there. Another one we can talk about is the leapfrog R&D area. So the strategy is highlighting these 7 areas, and for each of these areas, we're doing a roadmap. And so before talking about the leapfrog R&D, I'll talk about the roadmap. Are following a very thorough methodology, and I've been talking about that a lot. So apologies for those who hear this again, but we're looking into. We have 4 phases. The first phase is the state of the art. We're trying to map the capabilities in Australia in research, in industry, in startups in a certain area. So far, all the roadmaps we've done, we have around 400 to 500 entities entering into the state-of-the-art database. So there is a lot of expertise here, niche, maybe not yet qualified in space, but an expertise nevertheless, and nonetheless, and that's our role to try to transfer that. Then we try to see what's our vision and ambition in 10 years' time? What do we want to be? And then we try to draw the pathway to go from now to 2030 and see how we can reach these goals. And the next step is to implement and monitor. And the implementation is once we've done all this roadmap, and already now with the roadmap published, we can already see some programs that we could present to the government and show them that there is opportunity to invest, or we can present that to investors so they can see that there is an opportunity to invest there. So the first roadmap we published was the communication roadmap. They're all available on our website. I invite you to look at them. They're very small, but they're very comprehensive. And we try to explain a bit what is the area we're talking about. The next one was the Earth observation roadmap. The last one we did was the robotic and automation roadmap. And there is some pictures that looks like the slides you showed, Helen, like the vision of what it is to be on the moon. And we intend to be a player in doing the remote activities there. The R&D bucket was, surely in Australia, there is a lot of other things we can do. So we didn't want to exclude anything. And we actually realized that in applied space medicine and life science, there is quite a lot of expertise in Australia. Remote telemedicine, we have to do because of the size of the country. You may know as well the Antarctica division. There is a lot of people that are isolated here for 9 months. So there is, again, a lot of similarity with the condition of space. So we realized that we had a lot of expertise in all the life support you need to bring to this exploration program. So this roadmap, again, is highlighting these areas of opportunities, showing what kind of projects and program we can do, and demonstrated that there is an opportunity for the government and anyone else to invest in these capabilities, implement this roadmap, and grow the commercial opportunities, not only commercial, but research as well, because as we all know, space is a great environment to do some research, especially in medicine. So we have this roadmap, and maybe the last thing I'll say is we have several programs already in place that we started 4 years ago. So the first one were 10, when we call them ISI, Investment Space Initiative. And there were 10 of those. They're about to close. And it's good to see that even if they were up to 4 million, so small grants, small funding, all the ones we've closed so far, we could see that they've employed people, they gained some contracts. And just having this stamp of the Australian Space Agency, even if it's for small funding, is really promoting to the world, like, oh, the Space Agency has supported this company, what are they doing? And they've gained some contract with NASA or ESA. So we're small, we don't have lots of funding so far, but everything we've done so far is achieving this goal of growing industry and showing that there is commercial capability there. And I guess the last thing I'll say is we have now a big program, the National Earth Observation Program, and we expect to have more program coming on all the different roadmaps. And we will remain small, and we will remain promoting the industry and helping the industry too. I think I'll stop there because I've used my 10 minutes, but I'm happy to continue the conversation in the panel.
Thank you, Aude and Helen. Those were really exciting remarks you gave, particularly taking away two things. Helen said that the Australian space ecosystem is one of the most exciting in the world because of the cooperation with industry that is partially being led by the Space Agency. And Aude said mining is one of the things that is presumed to be where Australia is good at, remote operations and mining, etc. But other fields, for example, anything that has to do with supporting or monitoring human spaceflight conditions, such as remote medicine and life support systems monitoring, is one of the areas that Australia is actually also really good at because of the remoteness of the country and the vastness of the country. So that's really exciting. So we're now going to head straight into panel discussion, and I'd love to kick it off with a couple questions that we've gotten from the signups here in the registration process. And one, for example, is that we got from, which is actually a research sat, is a resident company of Stone & Chalk in Adelaide. And they're asking, with Australia's growing space sector, we're seeing a forthcoming trend for low Earth orbit to be democratized, or access to LEO being democratized and being open for access. This is a significant opportunity for CubeSat service providers like ResearchSat, which is also about microgravity research. We're currently facing a challenge to connect this new opportunity to a wider public market beyond the traditional research or academic sector. Could we seek the opinion from the panelists on how industry bodies would support startups or CubeSat providers in connecting to potential markets? I'm thinking maybe that could be something for Aude or Rebecca.
So I'm happy to start. When we did the roadmap as well, and that's maybe something I should have insisted on, everything we promote, we've checked that there is a market. So there is always a market study to start with. For me, I cannot think of investing taxpayer money into something that won't be viable. This is not our role. So even if it's research, we have identified a commercialization opportunity. So every focus segment that we highlight in our roadmap has an identified market with some report attached to it and factual research attached to it. So if anyone wants to do business in Australia, the roadmap is a guide to show this is what we've identified as a market opportunity. So that's the first response I would give Rebecca, and I think Martin would have probably a good insight on that. So over to either of you.
I'll just add on to that as well. As I think it's fantastic to see all these incredible startups, which are really meeting the needs, especially when we're thinking about research applications. And so it's just really translating all of that ingenuity into these amazing endeavors. And then I think it is really tricky is that next step of saying, okay, you've come up with a solution, but what is the real problem that you're addressing and what is the service you're providing? And I think that's where you have to dig into these roadmaps and understand what the greater appetite is in Australia and really work hard to connect with those bigger industry partners. Because I think one thing that's challenging with Australia's space industry is that we promote entrepreneurship because there's a lot of services that we don't have, a lot of sovereign capability we want to develop. But then that means you really have to help people appreciate what's then the appetite for the service you're providing, because it's hard when you're a bit ahead of your time to really do that. And so I think that's where you have to pair well. And I don't know, Aude, if you want to mention that the life sciences roadmap should be coming out very soon. So hopefully that will be a great guide for some of these companies.
So actually, may I jump in here for a second? I skipped over introducing Rebecca and Martin properly. So Rebecca runs microgravity as a section at Swinburne University. Maybe you want to introduce yourself quickly, tell us briefly what you do, how you do it, and why it's relevant.
So I'll do a brief introduction. I'm actually an astronomer by trade, but then had the opportunity to help our university students design and send their own experiment to the International Space Station, working with teams of high school students. And this was really amazing because it opened our eyes as a university to all the potential for some of the incredible research we're doing and how it can translate into the microgravity environment. And in particular, how Australia actually has a legacy of things like biotech and advanced manufacturing. And so it's really amazing to see how we can actually apply some of this research to a really interesting field, which is now very important in terms of supporting human spaceflight and the Moon to Mars and Artemis missions. So it's really about taking our talent and supporting these international and national missions.
Okay, thanks. Martin, over to you briefly. Just introduce yourself and tell us what you do. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Christian. Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Martin. I'm one of the partners at Main Sequence Ventures. We're an Australian venture capital fund that invests in deep tech companies. And for us, that means a company that's solving some sort of wicked engineering problem and usually has some sort of association with university research, either spinning out or connecting with research. And definitely space is definitely one of those areas of solving a wicked engineering problem. And one of our investment themes in our fund is called Bridge the Gap to Space. And we are explicitly looking at new startups and companies that are addressing what we call Space 2.0, the commercialization of space. And that's the area of the fund that I specialize in.
All right, exciting. And can you name a couple of these space companies that you've invested in?
Sure. We've been deliberately investing in companies in different parts of the ecosystem. So some of the companies that you may be familiar with, one is a company in the launch business called Gilmore Space that are building hybrid rockets for putting satellites into LEO orbit and beyond. Another company is in the IoT communications area called Myriota, based there in Adelaide, that you'd be probably very familiar with there, Christian. And they've got a platform that allows you to have sensors that communicate directly to satellites for the Internet of Things, to basically allow you to instrument the world, if you want to think about it that way. Another company is called Quasar Satellite Technology, which is addressing one of the challenges in the space ecosystem around downlink. With all these satellites that are going up in space right now into LEO and MEO, the downlink, the ground station component, is a bottleneck. And so they've got technology that allows you to scale out that. And then another company that's interesting, and we'll maybe chat about it later, is that we've also got examples of companies that have been in aerospace and non-space, but are now moving into space. And a great example of that is a company called Advanced Navigation that makes inertial navigation systems. And they've just announced some products, some Doppler LiDAR products that are actually going to be used on some of the Artemis missions for the lunar descent modules. Some people are building lunar descent capability. There's a couple of examples from our portfolio.
Okay, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. Okay, there's another question here specifically to Aude. How's the space agency prepared to bring industry to the table to engage with space-enabled research such as microgravity experiments and eventually space manufacturing? So you touched on a few things there, but maybe you could just summarize that again.
So bring to the table maybe two things. So first of all, publish that roadmap you mentioned, Rebecca. When we launch roadmap, we do, so before we were just doing a webinar to present the roadmap. Now we're doing two parts. We do a webinar to present the roadmap, but we also invite some companies to pitch. So they have a minute to say, I'm working in that focus segment, and this is why I'm relevant to the roadmap. And we realize that sometimes there is 500 people attending the webinar of our roadmaps, overseas as well. So it's already a platform for these startups or industry or research company to show what they are doing. So I think that's already an opportunity for them to promote what they are doing. And what we are also going to start doing this year, we're going to try to do some industry days where we're going to pick a topic where we have a program associated to it. And you may know that we also have a fast tracking program where we want to help people launching their tech into space, because when you go to TRL 1 and you want to get to TRL 9, that last steps of qualifying your tech in space is expensive. So we have a program to help doing that. So we are going to fund a lot of space tickets, either for a motherboard to be qualified, it could be a microgravity experiment, it can be anything. So we are designing this program as we speak. And once we're going to launch these guidelines for this program, we're going to organize industry events and research companies events so that they can meet, they can brainstorm, they can discuss, and they can see how this program can help them to continue their journey and commercialize and researching their activities.
Okay. Anyone, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, perhaps we are, because
Sure,
we are building, so one of the, actually what we're doing with our spacecrafts, So as I was saying, the bread and butter market, the main mission is really to serve these new infrastructures, so the stations. But as a first step, we are a free-flying platform. That is to say, the first client we are having right now are clients who want to do microgravity experiments, clients who want to do space tech demonstrations, and also entertainment clients and MODs. But let's focus on the microgravity and space manufacturing and space tech demo. So if we like zoom in this microgravity in space manufacturing, which I think is a question of the first one and the second one, I think we are at a time when this market step by step is starting to evolve. It was really at the beginning a market to prepare life on the moon, to study our body, how we can basically stay for 3 to 6 months to even longer periods in space. And because of that, it was mainly funded by space agencies. And step by step, there were discoveries being made, especially, for example, in the pharma industry on stem cells, or for example, printing tissues in space is easier than printing tissues on Earth. Or you can basically manufacture semiconductors in space that would be way more efficient than the semiconductors you would manufacture on Earth. So there are basically scientific data points which gives confidence that if this space environment becomes affordable, not only are we going to have a platform to do research to prepare life in space, like very long space travels or staying for very long in an environment of gravity, which is not the gravity environment we have on the Earth, but also a kind of private research space platform serving our needs on Earth. And I want to give a very concrete example. China is sending rice to their space station because crops change their behavior. Basically, the DNA of the crop is changing in microgravity because of the stress on the new environment. And basically, when the crops is brought back to Earth, it can be more sustainable, it can use less water, and can resist better higher temperature. So we are at the edge of that. Personally, I think nobody knows when exactly that market is going to grow gigantically, because we basically need to have protocol of research which are industrialized on Earth. And this can take very long, as it can be short. You have companies in the US like Varda, who are funded by Founders Funds, Lux, True Ventures, who are betting a lot on this market. Personally, I think we are an agnostic platform. We will be able to serve the stations, but of course, we're also serving clients who are doing microgravity experiments, and we'll see how basically this market is going to develop. And yes, it's difficult to have private clients, coming back to the first questions, because many of these pharma companies, they don't know the potential. And they have many other priorities than trying to sell an experiment in space. So as a first step, there is an evangelization dynamism to be put in place, which NASA started already 10 years ago, which now ESA is starting, and I'm hearing that now Australia also is going to start. And then I think that's going to help basically bring more private players using this microgravity platform for our needs on Earth.
Ellen, I might just pick up on something you said there about the manufacturing and microgravity. That's certainly an area that we've been looking at as well from an investor perspective. And I think the challenge right now is that many of those microgravity workloads are experimental and research workloads, which is great because it advances knowledge and science. But then what's actually a commercial model around that? And I think the example we look at is like, what is something that could maybe be manufactured in microgravity that is very high value, that cannot be done on Earth, shall we say? And they're the types of things that an investor like us is looking for, because at the moment we don't have ways to transport a lot of mass up and down because of the challenges that and the time it takes and when you can bring it up and when you can bring it down. So I think that's where, as an investor side, that's very interesting for us. Like, what is that high value, not too heavy something, right, that can be manufactured, can only be done in microgravity, but then it's very valuable when it is brought back to Earth, because ultimately the model can't just be make something up there, bring it to Earth. Ultimately, it's got to be, our view, there's got to be a space economy, which is manufacturing in orbit or in space for the ecosystem of activity that is in space itself.
So have you found that already? That item, which is very expensive but not heavy?
Oh, look, I think there's a couple of companies experimenting in areas, things like, as I think as Helene mentioned earlier, semiconductors and semiconductor-like areas, let's put it that way. No one's cracked it yet. There's been a few experiments and a few things that we've seen, but it's still, I think people are still searching for that killer product that can be made in a microgravity environment, so be manufactured autonomously, because as we get more spacecraft that are now cargo ships that go up, could be in microgravity for a few days and then come back down again. Once that becomes a sort of repeatable, reliable sort of cycle, then that opens up more experimentation and more things that people can actually try in a microgravity environment.
It's funny you mentioned that, Martin, because we're doing the access to space roadmap as well, and access to space is also returns.
Yep.
And you're exactly right. There is some cool optical fibers as well that you can manufacture up there.
Absolutely.
And often the product you're manufacturing in space, they need to be finalized when they come back on Earth. And you can dream of Australia being a place of choice to finalize this product and have these closed circuits. And we're looking into this, and that's very exciting indeed.
Yeah.
Perhaps to share a little bit, because actually we had the chance to work with McKinsey, who worked as a partner pro bono for us, exactly on identifying what could be very small mass, a very high value on Earth. So it's worth kind of paying the trip up and back, basically. And they identified like 4 areas. Number one is pharmaceutical, this pruning of tissues and the experience of stem cells, because there is a real bottleneck of stem cells on the pharma industry, and this is highest value for the pharma industry. The second one was the cosmetics, because basically we're aging faster, and cosmetic is one of the fastest growing market in the luxury environment. The third one was agriculture, because of the example I just mentioned. It can basically have huge impacts if the crop is coming and it's very different. And the fourth one was indeed semiconductors, just to do many research at the first step. Personally, as I said, I'm very careful about this market because I think there is an amazing potential, but there is a time to market, right? So if you're a startup, you don't want to wait 5 to 10 years until you have a huge market. You want to make sure that the first market you bet on is going to be like huge from the beginning. And I think for this market to become an industrial one, not only you have to basically solve the challenges to bring research into industry on Earth, what Ozma was mentioning, that you have to rework what has been done, but also you have to solve the re-entry challenge. And if you look around, you don't have that many countries who master this challenge. So that's why, personally, that's the reason why I said, okay, as a first step, we do this vehicle, we can re-enter, we can do many things. We are this kind of agnostic platform. We serve the stations because there's a very stable market that is going to multiply by 4 in the next 8 years. And if on top of that, there is like a bonus, and we can serve this new microgravity environment, and this is amazing. But personally, I think it will take time.
About the time, I think we're at some sort of inflection point right now. If you just read that SpaceX had 32 launches this year already, which is insane because we're barely not even in August yet. So we have 7 months covered and it's 32 launches. So it's world record breaking already. And now if we imagine that continues at that cadence, then very soon we'll have that infrastructure in orbit to have that, whether it's the larger in-orbit structures, the return capsules, etc. We have a couple of questions here from the audience that I'd like to run through, and I'm happy to take a quick punchy answer from you guys. There's one question here. Within the strategic space value chain, what are the areas with more potential for Australia to contribute in the development of the space market and industry? Maybe, I don't know, Aude? Sorry, you might.
But I think I covered that. I think we've identified these 7 areas of priorities. We have roadmap, okay. So I think that quite addresses
this question. That's the 7 areas that you want to focus on. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds
for
good.
now.
Okay. I could speak on actually though related to that, just in terms of that to microgravity. So we're talking about access to space, but microgravity, there's actually many different ways to access it as a platform. And I think this is where Australia has a lot of potential to develop capability. So you have on-ground testing, and this will be very beneficial for when you're looking at orbital flights. So we have random positioning machines. We have a small company, Firefly Biotech out of Adelaide, creating these. We have parabolic flights through Being Systems, and we're also going to have suborbital capability through equatorial launch. And of course, Gilmore doing some LEO CubeSats as well. So I think that's one element of it, is to explore is the different platforms and how they all come together for the supply chain and this access to be able to complete that. And I think that's really important for translating some of these super valuable research concepts. How do you start with something, especially as delicate and valuable as stem cells, and then you evolve that to something where you would be wanting to send it up in one of these capsules or for longer duration spaceflight?
Great, thank you. We have one question here on ethics. Are there any ethical issues surrounding space mining for resources in terms of disturbing possible microbial life? Do current space policies have any sort of protection against this issue?
So I can quickly take that. Yes, there is ethical issues, and yes, there are regulation. We signed the Moon Treaty and we signed the Artemis Accords, and there is the long-term sustainability guidelines as well. And I'll be careful using mining on the moon. We are talking about ISRU, in situ resource utilization. So we want to use materials on the moon to stay on the moon. We are not talking about exploring anything and bringing it back to Earth. So yes, there is a lot of rule, and there are some planetary protection guidelines, not guidelines, it's rules. So every time we're doing interplanetary mission, you need to make sure that you're not going to bring something that may disturb the area where you are landing. And there are discussions on Mars just now exactly around there. Every time you lose a location on the moon or Mars or any other planetary body, you have to make sure that you comply with this regulation. There is a lot of regulation in space, and that's mainly driven by the UN and the COPUOS organizations.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Another question here is, how applicable is remote sensing of the lunar surface? And if it is, what is the potential of remote sensing to look at possibly exploiting the resources that exist on the moon? I suppose as part of the Artemis, Project Artemis, there is also going to be remote sensing of the moon. Are there projects in the pipeline for that with Australian participation?
So there may be. One of our programs is the Moon to Mars demonstration program. These grants are closed. We have received lots of applications. There may be in there some position to do a remote sensing activity on the moon. So maybe we will have a program on that. I can't yet tell, but yeah, it makes absolutely sense to do some remote sensing on the moon. We want to see if we can find more water on the moon. So to do that, you need to map the surface and you need to see what's the signature of your observation and try to see if that means there is water or not. So absolutely, remote sensing is of utmost importance for anything we do on the moon and any other planetary body.
Great. Thanks, Aude. There's a question here more on the venture capital side for Martin. Can you tell us more about founders who are successful in raising venture capital, and vice versa? Maybe you can also share a few thoughts on those who are not able to raise venture capital, just comparing the two and giving some advice there.
Sure. Look, I think the advice I'd give here would be equally applicable for a space or a non-space founder that's trying to raise capital. Typically, what we see is that the founders that are successful at raising capital are the ones that can paint a compelling picture and a vision for their company and why they're unique. Because you've got to get people to believe in you. Because often when you're a founder, you may not have a product yet. You may only have very low TRL technology. And so it's around how compelling can you paint the picture of where you want to take this and where you want to be in the future. And you need to be confident, right? You need to be confident you think you can get there. You need to give that sort of aura of confidence. And I think in my experience, that's one of the areas I think I've seen that's been a little bit lacking in the Australian ecosystem. When I compare founders in Australia that tend to be a little bit more demure, maybe not as overtly confident maybe as US startup founders. And I think the challenge is to get that sort of right. I think the other thing that I've seen that works really well is that founders need to really know their stuff. And I actually had a meeting this week. It was interesting with one of our founders pitching to a new investor. And the new investor was coming in just going question like this. And good on this founder, they were able to answer every one of those questions confidently, quickly, and accurately. And so my summary of all this is paint a good vision, know where you want to be in the future, be confident, but know your stuff so that when an investor does start to drill in and ask those questions, if you can answer confidently and accurately, if you don't know, say you don't know. That's the sort of individual that can actually then raise capital and be successful in raising not just the first time, but the second time and the third time. Because usually with a startup journey, you get that seed capital, but then you've got to go for your next round and the following round. So there's some of the attributes that we see.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. And that sounds exactly what we do here at Stone and Chalk also when we work with the founders of raising money. Maybe Hélène can weigh in on this. Have you guys raised money in the past? Maybe just broadly, you can speak to that and where you are in the path of your progress there.
Yeah, so as I was saying at the beginning, so we are 1 year old. We've raised 11.5 million USD. We as founders, we've invested 1.5 million with our advisors. So I didn't give any stocks to advisors without their also taking the risk with us. And the team itself invested 1 million. So we had a very strong commitment, I would say, from people leaving their jobs at Airbus, Group with basically 10 to 20 years of space experience and saying, yeah, I'm taking a risk for my family. And I'm also putting some of my savings into this project. And I think this was a very strong sign of, on the one hand, I would say competence, and on the other hand, commitment of the founding team. And that's the reason why we raised a seed round very fast, actually. 1 month and a half, we had the seed rounds raised with 3 VCs, Promus Venture, actually the European part of Promus Venture. So we have the chance to have a VC, which is both in the US and in Europe, and which is a space tech VC, has a very, very good reputation in the space tech environment worldwide. We have a deep tech VC, which is V Squared, one of the best in Germany. And we have a normal, I would say, tech generalist VC, Cherry, again, one of the top in Europe. And I may share some experience. I would strongly recommend this combination of space tech, deep tech, and generalist VCs, because they come with completely different questions. And it's really great to be challenged and to learn from our shareholders with these different visions. We have 80% of our 24 mission, which is already pre-booked by clients. And this came because Cherry was adamant about, yeah, you're a deep tech company, but you need to have clients like immediately. And this is great. And when we just tried, and actually they were completely right. Even if your product actually is starting in the real operations, like in our case, it's 24, it's just a demonstrator, and then the real product will be 26. And actually we're starting setting the 26 right now, because you can have contracts with milestones where basically you can already have a down payment now, and both the clients are new or not engaged for life. But it gives a lot of confidence to the investors that what you're building has real clients, which I think is one of the challenges in the deep tech industry, where sometimes you have teams building products for very long and then not always like thinking about the clients. And then we've raised again, not again, but we've extended basically the round to families and strategics. So I was saying Schlumberger is among our investors, and the Dassault family, and some very, let's say, industrial German families are also with us. So that's where we are. I think if I may share some experience, I completely share what was said. I think something perhaps just to add was that the roadmap we have, which is every 2 years we fly, and every 2 years we need to show that our next capacity is fully booked by client, gives a lot of confidence, because it's not a process like you invest in 5 years and then you'll see if something happens. So I'd give it gives like on the operational side, so that we deliver on track and cost and quality, and on the commercial side, that indeed we have this commercial traction. And I think every deep tech company can play with that, with like minimal viable product that can be tested by clients already. And this gives, I think, to the investors, but I would be very happy to hear feedback from you, Martin, but ways more confidence that it's not a company in which you're going to invest money for 5 years and then you'll see what happens. Because of course, this is like more difficult, especially right now where people are really looking at metrics. And I guess wants to see that you're on track on the cash, on the planning, and you're on track on the commercial traction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said there, Helene. I think the early customer contracts, even though the product may still be a year or two away, is critical. And it helps actually guide your product development, because when you engage with the customer and you sign up for a contract, they'll give you requirements. They'll say, look, I want the thing to operate in a certain way or do it in a certain way. So you're not blindly going down 2-3 years of development and then saying to the market, here's our shiny thing, we want you to buy it. You're actually getting customer input from the beginning. So 100% agree with you. And we do the same with a lot of our deep tech companies, where getting them to get MOUs or other contracts ahead of time, often a year or two in front with the customer, because it's the best way for them to learn what the market needs.
Interesting. Yeah, there is a question here that I thought was quite interesting. Given that Australia is making such a push into space, and in the past, the case was for anyone who wanted to work in the space industry, it was actually to go overseas. And now, how do we facilitate training and collaboration with other space agencies and other countries internationally without causing that brain drain to continue, and in fact, people coming back, some sort of reverse migration and people not leaving? Is there some international way where the space agency or space industry of Australia can collaborate with other countries in a somewhat formalized way?
I'll start with this one. There is no brain drain anymore. I think there is a reverse brain drain. I think I've chased all the Australian citizens that are working in NASA or ESA or Airbus to come back home. There is still a few which I'm still working on, but we have also NASA retiring people who are coming here. There is a lot of people wanted to come and work in Australia. There is heaps of work. If you have a degree in system space engineering, you're going to have a lot of offer here. This is not 20 years ago when I was struggling to find a job. The market is really, really open now. There is, and again, for me, the best we can do is what you said, Martin and Hélène, is if the government can be an anchor customer, you're creating the market. And that's what we are doing. And that's what this national mission in Earth observation is starting to do. When the industry are saying that, oh, there is a procurement program over 10 years, and that is looking to purchasing 4 birds to start with. And now we're starting to talk. And now the industry is having the confidence that something is happening in Australia and it's not going away. There is that. There is also, we are doing a lot of work on workforce. Workforce is a problem everywhere. I thought it was an Australian problem, but going to Colorado Springs and IAC last year, it's a problem everywhere. So there is a lot of training modules. Some is 2 days to become space aware. Then you can do a 2 weeks, and you can be a year. You can do a master. There's a lot of programs that are being developed in Australia to try to tackle this workforce. And it's learning through programs afterward. And this is what these smaller grants we are doing are about as well, is learn on the job, do feasibility study. We are funding this. So there is a lot of things we are doing, and we are working on exchanging of stuff between agencies. And then industry can do that too. And I think it's easier for them to exchange. There is always, depending on the space program you're working on, there may be some citizenship issues, but the exchange of stuff between industry is already happening, and we are working on doing a accord with other agencies to do this exchange as well. Heaps happening here.
All right, sounds good. Exciting times. We're coming towards the end of our session. May I ask for final thoughts from all the participants? And maybe, Hélène, if you could go last in case you have anything special to say or announce. So maybe we can start with Rebecca, Martin, Aude, Hélène. Let's do it that way.
Sure. I'll just quickly say, following Aude's point, Equatorial Launch Australia, NASA was their first customer. And so we're also seeing in the university sector, through the Space Challenge, a lot of opportunity to match students with these great industry opportunities. And so certainly if you're keen to learn how you can find your way in industry, there are a lot of resources now, and we're happy to help support that.
Great, thanks. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I think my final comments would be something like, we're super excited about the growth of the Australian space industry and the commercialisation of space. And we want to be one of the key enablers there, helping find great companies and helping them to grow, become significant players on the global space ecosystem. I'd also say, if we've got any listeners that are or attendees of the webinar that are from overseas, to Aude as well before, we have fantastic opportunities here in Australia in the space industry. All of our portfolio companies, for example, have many open positions. Just in our situation, I think we've got about 300 open positions across our companies right now. There are lots of space positions open. So anyone's interested, come to Australia. There's lots of opportunity for space employment.
That's great. And for companies looking to get in touch with you, Martin, what's the easiest way?
The easiest way, just hit the website, look at our website main sequence, and there's an inquiry form. Just fill something there in and you'll be able to get in contact.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. Aude?
Yeah, and Australia is a great place to live. 22 years ago, I came for a year, and here I am. So yeah, definitely, there's a lot happening here. I'd like to maybe say something that is happening and we have to be aware of. There is a rise of cost of life. I think we're going to start seeing some consolidation. I think we're going to start seeing public money being a bit more scarce because of other priorities our government have to deal with. And that's not only for Australia, that's worldwide. So anything you do, make sure you have a market. It is very important to identify your market, even if you're doing research. Have a path of commercialization afterwards, because I think people are going to be more and more careful. And I don't know, Martin, if you're starting seeing this, but I'm afraid that we have passed that peak and we are starting to go down a bit. So make sure there is a market, and there is a market, but do your homework and show that what you're working on, there is a pipeline for customers. I think that's the strongest advice I would give.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say that we are being part of 2 consortium in a very small role, because we do not have an Australian company yet. And we have 2 Australian clients who like to fly with us. So the next step for us is really to go to Australia. Hannah is here. Some of you can see her. So I also have her contact. We've been very much impressed, I would say, by the dynamics of the ecosystem. So that's for us basically one of our next steps in international development next year.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the thoughts and the thought leadership that you've shown. We're excited to hear more about Exploration Company and the capsule that you've highlighted very briefly in the beginning. Thank you for all the attendees. We've had a large variety of attendees. I looked at the composition earlier. It was a lot of government, academia, entrepreneurs, students. So I hope we've given you some insights. We will post a recording of this session on YouTube in case you want to revisit, for those who missed parts of it. But for now, thanks very much. Thank you to the Australian Space Agency. Thank you to Swinburne University. Thank you to Martin at Main Sequence Ventures. And thank you to Ellen at the Exploration Company, and Hannah, of course, for setting all this up. And Hannah is your main contact in Australia here for Exploration Company. Thank you, everyone.